Yeah.
Oh, I don't even remember the topic anymore.
I know. I always end up forgetting like until the day right before.
Yeah.
You're not
Justice.
the only one.
So it's about 3:35 now. Do we want to go ahead and start or give it like another minute or so? I feel like.
Yeah, let's go ahead. We can go ahead and start. I think this is about as many people we're gonna get today.
All right, cool.
Oh,
Okay.
Fernando.
So are you receiving my?
Yeah.
I'm connecting to my laptop. So
Yeah, I'm receiving it.
There we go.
okay, just in case.
So if I have a great like quote from like kind of like a counter to like a proper idea of justice, but then I'll go ahead and give you Socrates' interpretation. But there's a great line by Thrasymachus that I want to share with you guys to start the debate, I guess, if no one else wants to say anything. So I'll go ahead and let me read that off real quick. So he goes, I proclaim that justice is nothing but the interest of the stronger. And then he continues, different forms of government make laws, democratical, aristocratical, tyrannical, with a view to their several interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interest, are the justice which they deliver to their subjects. And him who transgresses them, they punish as a breaker of the law and unjust. And that is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice, which is the interest of the stronger. And now, Socrates, he prefers to think of it as justice was not an arbitrary precept established by the state, but an eternal idea that embodies virtue and wisdom. You know, it's the ultimate truth, you could say, that justice is. So I don't know. Did that spark anyone's mind? Anyone got something to say about that?
I don't know if I agree at all.
With the Thrasymachus interpretation, or either of them?
Wait, what
I
exactly?
disagree for both.
All right, what's up then, Orlando? Tell me what you think.
Because I mean, it seems very elitist in its nature, the way that it's talking, that the strongest, it's their interest.
Oh yeah.
It's a very vague thing, but I think justice, and in the simplest form, the way you can put it, it's just like a sort of like an act of fairness, or you know, it could be seen as possibly a retribution, or rather affirmation or something. You know,
So is it universal?
I don't see it something that's kind of the interest of the strongest or something like that. Something that can maybe even seen as natural, possibly.
So you probably agree with Socrates then, and that it's a more expression of virtue and wisdom, of like truth, you know, or
Not necessarily, because I mean, virtue and wisdom, once again, very vague words. Like, only definition I get of those are like Aristotle's definition of virtue, which is kind of like something that functions, and whether or not it does it properly. But yeah.
So where could we find justice? Is there ever a perfect justice, or is it always just going to be one man says this and this is what?
Well, the way I see it is like it's kind of the case Marco brought up, which is kind of how we were going to frame this kind of talking point, where basically it was about the LGBTQ community, and like the case that essentially stated that is illegal for employers to fire their employees based on their sexual orientation. And I mean, I think in terms of how that relates to freedom and justice is that, you know, people should have essentially the freedom to go about living the way they want to live in a certain way, you know, to a certain extent, and yet still feel like justice is on their side, to feel as if they have justice sort of like this protector for their way of living.
Okay.
I agree.
Yes. Well, what I found interesting in what Matthew McConaughey was saying,
Yeah.
is that I guess we have two different types of justice in your like presentation. We have the one that it should be the ideal, and the one that is actually being given, and it's kind of like enforced into some people, because sometimes we have this idea that this is justice, but it is presented like it is not really justice. It's just serving the elite benefits.
Yeah.
And they're just telling you that this is justice, and if you don't really like go through it and analyze the message or the idea, you kind of like just swim by it and you just say, yeah, you know what, this is something that actually helped me, but it isn't. it's actually like being damage to your own rights. So that's how I perceive the message of Matthew McConaughey. I'm staying with Matthew
I like it.
McConaughey name.
There's always seems to be a justice that is enforced, a perceived justice, let me say, that is enforced by those in power, like Thrasymachus says, and then a seemingly true justice that those really feel like it's like those who, you know, feel that their daughter's killer or rapist get just away with a prison sentence or even get off. They don't get a sense of justice, but the justice system, as according to those in power, has achieved, quote, their justice by giving him that sentence, etc. But he, as a man, does not understand that as justice. He does not see that as justice, obviously. So it is not justice according to the men in power, but then there's something else that he wishes
I
to happen.
definitely,
Yeah.
I definitely think you're getting at something, Marcus. And I just want to ask Manzi. I don't remember which philosopher it was in the class for for ethics, but he was basically saying that justice is sort of like this safety net for people who are cast out of society. You know, it's or rather people who don't have who might essentially, you know, fall out of society rather. And it's sort of like this cold law that kind of helps whenever affection is missing.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's McNaughton and a few others that we looked at, but it really boils down to this idea. Again, you guys phrased the dichotomy well. It's, again, is justice natural or is it man-made? Is it human constructed? Which is to say that justice isn't real until humans decide collectively with our use of reason, or maybe not, what constitutes justice. And yeah, so the position to which you're referring, it seems to me, is more Socratic than it would be Thrasymachus, if that makes sense. It seems to lean towards this idea. Well, here's the thing. The author is trying to kind of have it both ways. He was trying to say, on the one hand, justice is real. Truth is real. It's something that we can root in deeper, maybe not so much metaphysical, but natural properties, you might. But he also wanted to say that regardless of whether or not it's natural or not, it is still just in our best interest to have a sort of, again, a catch-all. As you said, a safety net of something. We're considered entitled to as you know, humans, what they are again naturally. I'll just say this though, to be perfectly clear. Yeah, with Thrasymachus, the whole idea there is that justice is completely not real. It's a human idea. It's a human invention. And so if humans invent it, that means they can make it into whatever they want. And so the idea is that you're able to use justice, the notion of justice, as a tool for manipulating people for your own individual advantage. So you get people to buy into a certain idea of justice, and there's nothing morally wrong with that because there is no true justice. And Thrasymachus also says there is no true morality. Mm-hmm. So that's why all there is powerful people. And the way they get powerful is perhaps this is one way, is trying to play up this notion of justice in a way that kind of plays into the hands of those who are opportunistic.
I love that. I don't want to go off of that and say, you know, imagine humans don't exist. Do animals and the natural life they live, you know, carnivorous, etc., predator and prey, they have no conception of what they do could be a wrong. There's no conception of right or wrong, you know, with animals. But then humans, because I want to, you could argue this then that, you know, this agrees with Thrasymachus, but, you know, because humans have an experience of it that nothing else does, but then that is therefore man-made. But I want to rather say that we experience it because we have this level of experience of life that other living things don't. And so therefore we can observe such things happening. And so we then can observe and comment and, you know, do what we will with those said things, that with this freedom that humans have rather than that animals cannot, is the difference. And now you might say that, oh, humans make it up then, but I'd rather say that humans get to experience it rather than we make it up. We are a level of living, of experience that has the capability to see it or, you know, experience it. not just make it up. So
Very platonic. Yeah, very, very platonic, very Socratic.
we got Fortuna next, I think, and then John. Fortuna.
I don't know how I feel about the animals analogy, because I guess what I was thinking of is that animals don't really behave immorally, right? Animals don't kill each other for the sake of killing. Maybe they'll kill over land, maybe they'll kill to eat. But in terms of behaving in immoral ways, I think that's pretty unique to human beings, and other intelligent species such as dolphins maybe. But I'd say generally speaking, humans are the only ones incapable of behaving badly, so we're the only ones who have a need of a concept of justice.
Yeah, just to play off of that, human beings are the only ones with a concept of bad. Every other animal just does what comes naturally to it. So that's why you can't really blame it, because it's working off of just animalistic mechanisms.
They also
Organic.
don't behave maliciously the way humans do,
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. I mean, just interesting because it's like, well, perhaps what is natural for humans to do is decide what justice is. That's in our nature. It's to figure that out rather than maybe discover it.
I have a question for you guys. Do you guys think that justice and freedom are mutually exclusive? Because I feel like they're kind of one and the same.
Yeah. Justice comes along with having freedom, and then figuring out what to do with that freedom is almost figuring out what justice is. What you do with that freedom determines what your justice is, etc. It's a pretty tough situation that we got dealt. John, I think you're up next. What's up?
Manzi, do you cover the objectivism portion of this in 2306 as far as Randian or any of that?
Yes, but it's with much more, I should say, less inflammatory rhetoric.
Well,
yeah.
that's specifically why I'm asking, because it's appropriate to the geopolitical climate today. But I didn't know if it had been brought up before, so if I'd be repeating stuff that everybody in this room had already heard.
No, please bring it up.
So the question you could ask is, how can an objectivist rationalize his gossiping if the gossiping is performed to discredit another person? So the theory being judge and be judged allows an objectivist to judge others and presumably accept others' judgment of him. However, if an objectivist makes a public judgment that can discredit another person, when can judgment based on a lack of fact or a subjective viewpoint, how does that exactly contradict the very principles of objectivism? So there was a big part of, and it wasn't Atlas Shrugged, like is commonly associated with her, but I, off the top of my head, I'm not remembering which piece of literature it was associated with.
Fountainhead.
Fountainhead, okay. Basically goes into judged and prepared to be judged relates to justice and pride in that objectivist concept. So one judges others because one needs to know whether they're trustworthy, productive, rational, so on. Sort of those on-the-fly matrices we run through, whether we're cognizant of them or not. We're looking at a person we're trying to talk to, job interviewing, making friends with, what have you, and instantly making this list of judgments about, okay, can I trust this person? Can I approach this person? Well, that still applies from a social construct in a simpler way to how do we approach each other when we're talking about things like walking down the street? How do we approach people of different races, religions, ethnicities, the things that our minds perceive through our eyes, and then get our associated biases caught up in the Rube Goldberg machine between our ears. When it says, oh, this person dresses this way, so that means X. This person has this color skin, so that means X. Wouldn't that hold true that would in turn have a distinct impact on justice if that's how we use our ability or our lack of ability to clearly or inherently judge the situations that we're in?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna let other students respond, of course, but that I think an interesting response would be something like what Mackey said for anybody who took my ethics class. Not the learning community, Marcus, but my more standard ethics class.
Damn it.
Yeah, because I know there's a lot of retort to it. I'm just curious, okay,
Yeah.
if it starts from that, where do we take it from there? And is that truly what we could consider a definition of justice?
Well, I think the idea would be this. Oh no, please, somebody go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I insist.
I was just going to say, it seems as if that's a justice based on interpretation and perception of whatever, the mind does see, and then based on whatever is built into the human before that moment of perception and understanding, it then gets filtered through said filters that is set before them, either through birth or experience of learning. And I wouldn't say that as justice. I don't know if that's not where true justice would lie, is in that perception and understanding of it. If I'm going off of that right, I don't know. It was a good comment, but I'm trying to fully understand. So it was.
Have you read Rand? Try to fully understand, period. It's fun.
I haven't, because apparently Manzi didn't put it in the learning community, but
You got better stuff. Right.
yeah, we did have great stuff. I love Sartre and what is it? Who's the other one? Heidegger.
Yeah.
I love those.
Art, Heidegger,
Heidegger's
Kierkegaard, those are probably
big.
Manzi's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
They've become it. But I just want to say this too, for in response to John real quick, and to build on what Marcus was just saying, because I think you're going down the right path there. And again, to bring in kind of Mackey, for those who are familiar, it's like this: where from whence do we derive these quote unquote objective standards by which we then modify our behavior, and we could say which also in turn shapes our perceptions and therefore our behavior? Is it derived from nature, from what is sort of woven into the fabric of reality itself? Or is it from other human beings who just maybe lived before us? So again, Mackey would say this: there is such a thing as objective standards. Objectivity is real. But the understanding is that objectivity comes from a subjective consensus. And this is where we get kind of like, political. This is where we get, more societally speaking, with the idea that as members of that society or members of that tradition encounter innovation, when they encounter new experiences, or even just things that seem to defy the categories that their understanding has laid out for them, one then, how to put this, adapts that experience, gives priority to or precedence to the experience, and then adjusts the objective standards. So the point being is this: objectivity is real, but it's also malleable, appropriately so. I guess that's the idea. So especially when you want to consider sort of contemporary circumstances, this I think is an optimistic way to kind of look at that understanding of objectivity. That's not what, Rand thinks, but that might be a response to it. I'll be
You
here.
always have to throw a wrench in there.
A range. I'm trying. I'm swinging.
Don't.
Batting average sucks.
I'll just bunt next time. But yeah, well, returning to a point that Orlando brought up, and keeping in mind, I believe we wanted to address, or maybe we did, I guess, address it, but further delve into the LGBTQ particular circumstance that I think I want to say gave rise to this topic. I'm trying to recall exactly how we arrived on this topic, honestly, from last time.
Is
I
Marco
remember-
here? Maybe he remembers. I think he was the one who brought it up.
Oh yeah, Marco's here.
Yeah.
What's up, Marco?
Hi there. Yeah, I brought it up because last week, prior to the conversation, they had just passed the bill saying that LGBT people can't be fired just for identifying as gay, lesbian, transgender. So I was just I just wanted to talk about it because it was something that I think that should have been changed a long time ago, because why should I get fired for just identifying as a gay person? Like, that doesn't mean my work ethic is any less than someone else's.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I think the way this is being framed is like the freedom to fire someone for being LGBTQ versus justice in terms of having that right to not be fired. Am I correct in that, Marco? Or
Yeah, like there should have already been, like, for me being gay, like that should have already been a part of the discrimination law that was already passed. Like, it just made me think, like, why did it take so long for, like, to allow someone just to still fire me until 2 weeks ago? Like, why didn't the justice system do something earlier, or like, pretty much, I don't know.
Yeah, no, okay, I remember now. And I like that. I like to focus on, as I said before, concrete current examples of these kind of nebulous concepts like justice or fairness. Those vagaries. It's far, I think, more fruitful to try to contextualize them, place them in real existential situations. Yeah, so I guess the idea would be that, again, this is a matter of justice, especially if you understand justice as equal rights. And this is America. It's a rights-based society, primacy of rights. The focus of, again, governments is to serve the individual, hence civil servants.
But I
That's
have a question. When two people perceive that the justice is not being served, and like how do you approach it if both of them has like logical reasons why not to feel that it's been some justice served? Like, how can you approach it? Like, there's the usual thing, like, no, like we want to protect like the conservative idea of family, when like it should be like one man and one woman together instead like two men and two women, things like that. So like when those kind of like idea clashes, I'm not saying that it has to be this example per se, there are many others, but since we're talking about it, like how can we really know that we are actually like approaching this issue fairly, I guess, like proper justice is being served, so to speak, when you have two opposite ideas and there is not really a clear in between?
You call on Judge Judy and she adjudicates. No, I think that's honestly at the heart of the question. What do y'all think? I mean, what?
You got at it earlier, Manzi. You kind of explained it. It's just this idea of like the society, is that as a society, we kind of come to these social norms that kind of make this justice appropriate. Just to kind of go back to what Marco was saying, they based this court decision basically on the Civil Rights Act. I forgot, which year it was. I should know, but on the Civil Rights Act, and they essentially deciphered that that you cannot be fired based upon your sex, and they were trying to decide if that meant sexual orientation or just gender, and they said yes, it is sexual orientation. So essentially, what you're seeing there is that justice, in a sense, was kind of already served. But it wasn't until there wasn't like a Supreme Court case that came about. There wasn't until someone brought it up and said, as a society, hey guys, I need justice, give it to me. And so that's kind of how it goes, is that when people feel their freedom is being impeded, and as a society we decide what justice is, that's when you can really kind of figure out. If that makes any sense, I don't really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I concur.
Yeah.
I concur.
John, did you had something to say, right?
Supreme Court Act 1964, Orlando. There was also a hinge there on the, I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, but.
You want a bath? Shoot, I'm sorry.
I've never had Manzi ask me that before. That was awkward. Got him.
I'm sorry. Embarrassing.
To something Marco was saying, and I'm not gonna go too far down the rabbit hole, but stick with me for a second. getting into the working world during the .com period, there was still a lot of, for lack of a better way to put it, don't ask, don't tell in the workplace. People like me had to actively shield their sexuality. So if you weren't whatever the traditional definition was, not necessarily all the way toward the moral majority, which may or may not be a term you guys caught in history or not. Manzi probably did. I don't know how many of the rest of you guys did, but if you didn't fall in the Reagan atomic family line, then you weren't correct. And it was very clear that you weren't correct. It was almost abhorrent. And we could feel that as straight, white, what have yous, we could feel that that was the case.
Yeah.
So as time went on, something that I found interesting, especially since whether it was natural gravitation, whatever the case was, I found coworkers in different places of employment who were maybe not necessarily cis-pan like I am, but they were something other than that moral majority traditional definition. So we got to know each other. We were open to discussing things amongst ourselves, but we also felt amongst ourselves how outcast we were. Even though we had, say, white skin, even though we had a lot of these other advantages, and I'm not anywhere near going down some rabbit hole that we still didn't have white privilege or any of that kind of stuff. It's still very true. Specific to the LGBT discussion, what we didn't have was a level of familiarity and comfortability inside a working environment. Now, Marco made a point in the chat that I was also going to make, and it was kind of that awkward feeling that we had to go through, is our personal life is not associated with our work life, but at the same time, we couldn't live it. And at that time, anyone that found out that we exercised our life the way we did could have fired us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They could have fired us for congregating as 2-3 people in the office environment and said, oh God, not those people. That's all they would have had to have thought, and we could have been fired. So fast forwarding into the early, basically just post.com bubble, I had a friend who was gay and having difficulty finding a job in the programming sector because .com kind of screwed that up for a lot of us. And he called me one day, never gonna forget this, it was the weirdest thing. I'm having trouble getting through these interviews. I go to these interviews, they go great, they go great, they go great, they never call me. Okay, well, let's talk about it. What are you saying in the interviews? Are you misreading the job descriptions, whatever? He was specifically calling out in the job interviews that he was gay. And one of the points that I made was, well, are they hiring you because you're gay? Is that a job qualification? And we had to stop and we had to talk between us how that actually worked and what we were actually trying to accomplish as individuals. Do I go to a job interview and say, this is who I am? How much of my personal life, other than my job skills, do I bring to an interview as a job, as a qualification for said job? Versus how much freedom do I feel is being restricted? And what I came to for myself and what I was trying to discuss with him is, look, this has nothing to do with what they're hiring for me when I go to a job interview. I don't have to wear a t-shirt or a tie with my suit that says I'm cis, pan, this, that, or the other. Because I wouldn't put my resume on my tie either. I hand it to them, we discuss it, we go through those qualifications. So it's not to say that I'm denying who I am, it's saying that I'm focusing on what the important task is at hand. Because if it were important to me at that level, I would start every philosophy club meeting with, hi, it's your cis, pan, Randian, lovin', blah, blah, blah. And I'd be spending 10 minutes introducing myself.
Maybe we should.
Because I would feel like if I didn't, my freedoms and things were so restricted that I'd have to run down this litany of shit nobody cared about. Not to say that I don't personally care about my own things and embrace those about other people, but where do I draw that line, and where does it become a justice issue, a freedom issue, and where does it become a, well, I'm probably stepping outside of whatever the social norms are.
Yeah, but nonetheless, a freedom of self-expression.
Yeah. So I get it. That's kind of a long-winded way to put it, but I feel that it's important to give that contextual history because the way work environments were in the 90s and early 2000s are not what work environments are today. I'm not necessarily saying they're 100% better, but they sure as hell aren't 100% worse either. And with that, I'll shut up.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was very well said, and it discusses the idea that humans can have conflicting ideas of justice, what is right, and then what is wrong according to being a human. And with that, I want to bring up, like according to the Republic, every human soul has three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. So going off of that, the reasoning from that person who saw that as being LGBTQ as being wrong has their reasoning and their appetite for, and maybe even their soul, is skewed accordingly so to their being. But it doesn't mean that that's the ultimate interpretation of justice, and it doesn't mean that that is the right justice, just according to those in power interpreting it. So, if that makes any sense. And so there's a constant battle in humanity of, I'm reasoning it this way, you're reasoning it this way, who's right in their reasoning. We're always trying to find, I mean, isn't the goal to find the truth of what everything is? But if that's the goal, why do we let our preconceived ideas and conceptions and biases, et cetera, get in the way? Because we forget they're there and we allow them to get in the way, and we're not aware of them enough to cancel them out in the conversation. So I agree that it's wrong, for a man with preconceived ideas of right and wrong to, unjustly, according to him, according to himself, it's just, but according to the truth, in my opinion, the non, I don't know how to say it, not interpreted like entirely personally, like there's a way to observe it that is non-personal. And so it makes sense for it to be that way, even if it's wrong according to you, because your interpretation might not be right. And so them interpreting it that way is wrong because they're interpreting it through the filters set before themselves, like I was saying, that every human builds as human beings are like a mound of clay. Okay, we come out of the womb as a mound of clay, and then we are constantly pushed. Like, you imagine the first experience, the first memory you have is as a finger pushing on the mound of clay. Okay, it's an imprint and an impression made on a thing, a solid thing, and so then that thing becomes something accordingly so to that imprint. But with clay, it can mold and move, and then it can even be added and subtracted, and that's sort of what the human experience is. We are either adding things to ourselves, we're subtracting it when we become aware that it is a problem or a negative. You can subtract it from yourself, or you can add other things. You can add something that someone else told you, and then this is an addition to the clay or another imprint on the clay to make you into something else, to mold you as a thing. Because humans are metaphysical. We have this experience of this conception of things that isn't just there physically or observationally. We have this ideas of it. We have the preconcept. We have a tree is not just the tree I'm seeing in front of me, but there's this a perfect idea of a tree. It's the form of the tree. Is that the right saying, Manzi? There's a form and then the idea, right? Accordingly, so I believe.
Yeah. And then Plato also wants to say there's also a form of justice, like the form of the tree. It's the perfect. It's the ideal. The Greek word is literally eidos. It's where we get the word idea from. So yeah, I like the path you're traveling down. I mean, look, again, if you want to kind of stick to this sort of Republic perspective, which is a great one, it's brilliant. I think that you're laying it out pretty clearly. I mean, look, another way to put it would be this: it's the argument about the tripartite soul is that there's a certain nature to all of humans that if they're going to be happy, this is what Plato believed, as far as I can tell. If humans are going to be happy, they can only be happy in a very particular way because they are a very particular kind of being. Because we have a certain, just like we have a physical nature, we have a metaphysical nature. That's our soul. And so Plato believed that, well, we have a body that is naturally inclined to satisfy its own desires, and not just in a way where you're hungry and you eat food, but like you eat tasty food that smells good, stuff like that. Because we have these bodily receptors for pleasure, it kind of detracts from what maybe our larger, dare I say, purpose is. And for Plato, that is to emphasize the aspect of ourselves that is uniquely human. And that's, again, reason. That's intellect. That's the soul, ultimately. And so the idea is that for Plato, you have to impose censorship. You have to impose strict, rigid laws, strict restrictions for the benefit of the community. And if certain laws, and Plato, he means heavy censorship. And if that is not there, then any community that lacks those rules will not be happy. So that's where this whole idea of objectivity and objective justice and the pure form of justice comes from. Plato thinks human beings are a certain way. And since that's the way we are and it cannot be changed, again, nature, the Greek word is physis. That's where we get the word physics from. It means unchanging. Because human beings can't help but be a certain way, there are certain things that they require in order for them to be happy. And sometimes humans will undermine their own happiness by pursuing things that aren't as satisfying as other things. But if you impose laws and rules and regulations and restrictions, and you educate the youth from a young age, you cultivate them like a culture, what happens is you'll have people who are more inclined to pursue what is naturally good for them. And that's the purpose of a government, is to make sure the right laws are in place that are consistent with what it is that human beings are, and therefore how they flourish. Very different from, again, Thrasymachus, who argues there's no such thing as any of that. There is no such thing as human nature, really. There's no such thing as higher truth. It's all we have are just different cultures that are all just invented by humans, so they're all equally invalid. And in which case, why not try to seize the opportunity and convince other people that your culture is the culture, your truth is the truth.
I love that.
I love that too. Like,
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm teaching summer 2. Just expanded the enrollment caps. I'm teaching fall.
I mean, like, for example, something that I do have to say when it comes to freedom and justice is, well, I am from Venezuela, so I have seen how freedom can be used to limit the justice. At least in my country, that's how it works. Like, yeah, you're gonna have more freedom of being whoever you want to be if you follow this path, and they kind of like play with both terminologies and it ended up being something that create a lot of damage. So what you say, it does, when it comes to the perception of freedom and justice, like the balance between them and the censorship, as you mentioned, it is a very important thing. Like, it's not easy to really get it right. It does have, like, as Marcus was saying, like, you have to like really go through like your history. Like, you have to, like, it's not just about rationale, because sometimes what may be logical for you is not logical for other people. Like, there is so many stuff involved that it is a very important topic. And I know that a lot of people just talk about it, but I don't think like we really go in depth into like everything that goes to it, because again, like, what it can be seen as justice, sometimes it isn't. But
Yeah, I think you're right. And like, again, it's who's to say what is and is not justice. Here's the thing. If you disagree with Plato's understanding of what a human being is, then his entire argument for what a government should be and what justice should be kind of falls apart. It's all precedented on Plato's notion of what we are.
I wanna go off of that, Manzi. When he says, you know, you want to cultivate the youth from a young age, and then place strict, restrictions, and then they become, they will become accordingly so, like in the goodness of things or whatever. It's almost like, look at other living things. Okay. I love comparing human beings to other living things because you start to recognize, imagine a crop of corn. Okay. You properly water it, you give it good restrictions, you give it good, et cetera, et cetera. And then it becomes the thing that it should be, which is good corn. It
Yeah.
provides a good yield and a good fruit. Human beings, we don't grow fruit. We have this fruit that is metaphysical, which is the ability to feel joy, to love other people, to live. We have metaphysical fruit, not physical fruit.
It's an awesome band. Metaphysical.
It's even more delicious though, because it's metaphysical. But I think I love that, because you see then that if you water a human being accordingly and you give them the right restrictions accordingly, that human being can become that molded clay that a human being can become and should become as a thing, as a human thing, living. And so just finding out what those restrictions are and what proper dose of water to give it, et cetera, et cetera. That's always a fighting game, and no one really ever knows the true answer to that. But I'd like to understand the idea that there's a certain way that a human being can be, and that there's certain ways that you can help it become that way. And it's not giving a 5-year-old a phone and letting them sit in front of it for the entire meal, never even speaking, only moving it away from their face to like eat a piece of food. I experienced this so much as a server, this family, and they do it because they don't have to deal with the kid. I swear, it's like because they need the kid to be distracted. They don't want to have to influence it. They don't have to want to water it. It waters itself. Okay, they have it set up to a self-sprinkling system at that point or some shit, where they have it
I like this metaphor.
entertain itself accordingly, so they don't have to entertain it and grow it themselves. It's a duty. It's a job, in and of itself. It's stressful too to figure out what to give the child, what to say to the child to make it become a thing. And so they just give this thing that's been given to them before, but at a younger age, and they don't see the consequences that it could bring. That it doesn't mold the child a certain way, and instead it molds it and maybe even like cuts it in half, or like paralyzes it in some way.
Or to use your metaphor, it deforms it.
Yeah,
from
exactly. It ruins the crop. The crop becomes poisoned, and so it yields not good fruit, not good metaphysical fruit, as in love and joy and good experience of life and understanding, the beauty of things. That instead it turns sour. It sees the world as sour, and it sees hate instead, and it sees sadness, and it sees all these things instead of, because it's built a filter upon itself now according to how it's been watered. And so now that filter, like the corn sees the world. Okay, if corn has eyes, it sees the world a different way. Okay, just like humans.
It has ears. Am I right, folks?
I gave it to you, that one, man.
You are incredibly fired.
But I like to think of us that way, because we're living things, and trees are a living thing, and they need water. They need certain boundaries. They need a certain way to become the best tree they can be. Because the idea of a tree is not the tree I'm seeing right in front of me. The tree I'm seeing in front of me is a form of that idea. It's not the perfectness of the idea. So what can a human do to become the perfect idea of a human, if there ever is one? Is it
Plato's whole question.
This?
Yeah.
I feel like this, where you were saying, Manzies, it kind of falls apart, because then when you say that, you have to say that, well, are all people going to turn out to be the same true potential? They're not. We're all different in many different ways. And also you have to identify these water, these nutrients, these different things. And I think ultimately, you can't. I think what you're referring to in this metaphysical sense is personal sovereignty. It's just this natural way of feeling like I want to make the decisions for my future. I want to be the person that I strive to be, in a sense. And so like there's a thin line between restrictions that are helpful and then restrictions that will stunt you from being what you want to be as a person.
Absolutely.
So where you draw the thin line, that's the problem. And I think we're finding more and more as we progress through society is that there is no recipe, there is no formula. We're more figuring it out that it's a cultural thing. It's very different for everybody. And you see that in this LGBTQ community. You see that in the different communities that are coming out. And it's justice is supposed to be a protection of that and the freedom for you to have that.
Going off of that, the water that we talk about, the watering that helps a living thing grow. the water, according then to a human, could be experiences, because we have senses that allow us to experience this physical world, etc., and that we then put a filter on top of, but that help it grow in a positive manner. We could say, physically abusing a child or sexually abusing a child or emotionally abusing a child is obviously poisoned water. It is an experience that gives negative filters to that human being that then experiences this life. It grows up hating life. It grows up hating living things. It grows up wanting to destroy every living thing that it can know and see, because it has been nurtured that way. And so what if the water that we say could be the best formula is giving it however you want to define this, like good experiences, love, because trees don't have parents, but human beings have parents for a reason. We have this cheetahs or whatever, all these other animals in the kingdom, they go away like really quickly because they don't have the moldability that humans do. They're already pretty much a rock, a physical thing that just needs a few touches up to become the thing that it should be, because it's natural for them. But human beings, we have this experience of freedom that allows us to almost choose what kind of rock we want to be, what kind of mold of clay we want to be. And so that's why.
Let me just push again for a
there.
second. Let me just push again, because here's the other side of it, and this also goes back to Orlando's point. But I want to challenge that too. How does one develop personal sovereignty or even a personal identity if it's not through, at least initially, if it's not through inherited traditional values, which are sort of like the initial mold, the initial, again,
the soil that you're planted in.
Can I
It's the
reply to
soil
that
that
really
you're
quick,
planted
Nancy? So I
Yep.
kind of, when taking your class, I loved Charles Taylor's interpretation of that, where he's
Right.
basically saying that you need to have a society that kind of enables this personal sovereignty in a healthy way, by having things like libraries, by having things where people are free to discuss and not feel afraid to be judged by it. And that's, once again, it's just this more idea of justice, where it's essentially saying that although I might disagree with someone, there's no repercussion for me disagreeing with someone. And so,
I suppose, but again, it's like, can you get justice wrong? Like you can get a math equation wrong? Do you
but that's
think?
the thing. It's a very different thing. You can't compare those two. A math equation is very simple, has one answer. It's something
Plato
like
compared-
distance. What?
Plato compared them. Plato said they're the same thing, more or less.
I understand what you're saying, but get what you're saying?
No, listen, I like where you're going. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
No, well, 2 plus 2
just
equals
making
4,
things
and I
difficult
don't
for
think
you.
there's a real discussion against that. And so I think for justice, that's something that is due to change, dependent on the society.
Yeah, indeed. But here's the thing: is that especially in the West, the culture for so long has been, and it starts with Plato. It's been, again, there are values that never change. What changes are people's ability to perceive them with greater and greater clarity. And again, you can call that progress if you like. So the reason we have different kinds of values, or more specifically, different notions of justice, is because we're like people who are trying to learn the math equation, and we get closer and closer to the right answer depending on a variety of circumstances. And so the idea is that you can be wrong when it comes to things like values, when it comes to things like justice, like sexuality. This is the traditional Western version of things. And again, I like all the points you're making, because it's pushing us towards this hopefully more fair notion of justice, like truly fair, which is to say, and here's the question: is the only way to do this to literally put objective truth on trial, or at the very least notions of an absolute value, like absolute right and wrong? Or ought we, kind of like Mackey, are we better off concluding, at least practically speaking, that again the truth about values can change? The fact of a value is that it can change.
Exactly. That's a good point. But just to kind of go back over what you're saying, just because what exists today doesn't mean it's the only thing that will ever exist. And that's kind of my response to your initial thing about traditions. And although I agree, we're all a very similar, I guess you could say, similar nature, under different circumstances in a society, could we see different morals? And I think in terms of cultures, you do see that. You do see very different, cultural relativity. You see different societies who see death differently than we do. You see societies who see sex differently than we do. And so built on that, it's hard for me to say that there is only this one way, and that just because that exists, that is the only thing that exists.
Yeah, absolutely. But then it's like, well, nonetheless, is it just differently, or is it wrong versus right? Like, if some cultures are okay with rape, is it just different, or are they wrong in their values? Is there not some greater objective standard for how humans ought to behave, going back to our rational nature?
Well, then that's when you're going to start to question, well, built on what? Am I built on this idea that everybody should be happy, that there should be the least amount of people that are suffering? Or should it be that we should take everything on a singular basis? It really depends on how you're looking at it. It's not.
I'll say that it's that you don't
Action
contribute
is-
to the suffering of others, rather, is another good.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of hard to do that. But actually, what you said, Orlando, is something that Simon Bolivar said. He's some important, at least in South America. He said that the perfect government was the one who was able to establish the most happiness, like overall. Like you can't really make everyone happy. So by that definition, it's really impossible for you to not make someone unhappy.
That's getting toward utilitarianism.
Huh?
A little preview for next week, maybe.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting point that you're bringing up in there, Orlando.
Thanks.
It's like this. It's like, human beings. I want to go back to corn because I love comparing this to living things. I'm sorry, but a corn stalk can't turn to the corn stalk next to it, spit in the ground, and pull out a little vial of poison from its pocket, and then pour it in the soil, or break its stalk off, or tear its leaf. It just is there.
But think
Okay,
about it
but
like
human
this, Marcus.
being-
Corn wasn't always delicious. We made it that way.
But a human being can turn to the other living thing that is next to it.
But that's the
And-
point I'm trying to make, is that these things do change in their nature because we have decided to change it. Corn looks and tastes the way it looks because of our genetic modification of it.
No, but it grows a certain way because that is the way things grow, is what I'm trying to get to. Living things don't grow unless they are watered. Human beings can't become a good human being, a good living thing that they're supposed to be, unless they're watered accordingly so.
I understand what you're
corn
saying. Yeah.
We have
can't eat.
hydroponics. different ways of making it grow.
Exactly.
Oh, you mean this wasn't a film review of Children of the Corn? I'm sorry, I just caught up.
I thought we were
That's
reviewing
next
corn's
week.
second album.
Well, it's a simple plant. We got to look at it because it's a living. We started. If you believe in evolution or whatever, because you can still believe in evolution and be a creationist. It's people. God is a great
That's
scientist.
a
Okay, you
fact.
could say.
We literally modify its genetics.
But the idea is that
literally-
we don't modify the way things grow, though. Okay, we can't make a tree grow without giving it the necessary requirements for a living thing to grow, which is water and sunlight. That's what trees need. That's what plants need, is water and sunlight, or substitutes of such thing that give it the sense of it having that. So a human, though, we don't have these very concrete things that make us grow, is the whole point that we're noticing here. They're very vague things that can either make a human grow off in this direction, or do a loop-de-loop and a backflip and crash on itself or something. But it's identifying that it makes it grow, and it's good for it as a thing. So then you could very obviously say that physical abusion is a negative thing to the plant or a living thing. So rape in any culture would then be considered not good, not just, not good for the living thing. So then you could objectively look at that and understand that, and say and establish that it is bad, it is not good for that living thing that it was acted upon. It negatively impacts them emotionally, psychologically, and physically in all these other ways. So it's obvious that it's not objectively good for the living thing that it is. You could say, oh, it's this water that I poured on this corn, but it's really shitty water that makes the corn absolutely insane, or not absolutely insane. What I mean is like absolutely poisoned is the point. Humans, we are watered through interactions. We're watered through experiences, okay? Because we have these senses. That's our roots. It's our ability to absorb water. It's our plants that absorb the sun. It's our senses. We absorb everything around us physically, emotionally, psychologically, metaphysically, all these things, because we have the organs necessary to do so. So we have this experience that can then be watered in a certain way, in an entirely different way than most things do. And
Yeah.
so you can look
Delicious,
at that.
Can I say something real quick because we're kind of getting short here?
Yeah.
So I definitely see the point you're making. You know, there's a proper way and there's an improper way to, I guess you can nurture or, you know, not nurture a human. But I kind of have to disagree with that comparison because, I mean, obviously corn, they just grow up to be the same, to look the same, to be the same, have the same function. But for humans, that's not the case. I think you could make a comparison in the mortality of humans to say you need water, you need air, so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's like, what was it I was going to say? Dang it.
Well, no, hold on. To your point, I mean, humans harvest corn. Who harvests humans? It's a different thing.
Yeah.
I
So there's this thing called Skynet.
I get what you're trying to say, Orlando, which is, you know, a human being can't just become one thing. And I'm not trying to say that we could become one thing, but the one thing that we can become is that we can become anything. And for a human to become anything that it wants to be or could be, it needs to be watered accordingly. So is what I mean.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So if it's not watered accordingly, so it's not going to become whatever it wants to be. It's going to be stuck in whatever rural, poor environment or hood or whatever you want to say is that it grew up in, that it was planted in, the rocky soil that it was planted in, because it was not given the proper nutrients, etc. It cannot become whatever it can become, which is the purpose of what a human is to become whatever it can become. But a corn can only become corn.
So look, I like it. You know, it's a very platonic way of saying things. You know, that we serve a purpose, just like, you know, chairs serve a purpose. Like, you know, the purpose is to follow the soul. You know, that's a very, you know, it's a good way to put it. But I think the idea is trauma. You're kind of saying that there's certain things that will hurt a human, but trauma, in a sense, you know, is something that's supposed to hurt a human. But for some people, it helps them develop their life. It kind of makes them who they are, and even trauma, in a sense, can make someone stronger. So
that's because they were a different form of clay at that point in time when they experienced the trauma. The clay was not the same as the other clay that experienced the trauma. It was already built, maybe a little bit more rocky in a certain place that allowed it to use the trauma differently.
But going back to the corn, like, you could see trauma as this poisonous water, but yet the corn is still, the human's still going to continue to grow. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't think necessarily that's is that simple. But yeah, we are reaching at 4:30 here, so
I thought that was a great. I love that end off. I love what we got at right there. I don't know if anyone else felt that, but I felt it.
I can't imagine why you felt it. Something about being inundated with corn.
Man, I could say
delicious, man.
Potatoes, a potato. You know, we could use anything, okay? But
corn is amazing, so let's not even.
They definitely had a kernel of truth.
All right, so that's the meeting before Manzi can get any other puns in.
Real quick, does anybody have any other kind of final thoughts on this stuff? Feel free to
I'm good.
diverge from that water analogy. But yeah, I mean, just strictly speaking, like, I don't want to throw out something out there like, what do you think justice is? But I suppose, why do you think justice matters in terms of the real concrete realities of things? I understand that it's very, and maybe we can look at this next time when we look at a couple of different theories of justice. Kathleen Stevens texting me. But you know, in more systematic ways, like utilitarianism versus maybe deontology, like how does that systematically play itself out into things like justice? But more for the moment on kind of concrete, the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Like how does justice, if at all, how does it impact sort of the day-to-day in such a way where you're like, I can't tell you what the definition of justice is, but I can recognize when something's unfair.
Doesn't that go back to the objectivism, though?
I think it kind of goes back to subjectivism.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to your particular culture's understanding of what is and is not fair. Now, that culture could be influenced by more objective, you might say, a more objective scope, more objective concerns. But I mean, again, I love the clay analogy in particular because human beings are made to be informed, literally impressed upon. Oh, is that your cat?
I think they're dogs.
Nikki, Fernando, and I are having a side conversation. Sorry.
It's a cat. Is it both of the cats or just one of them?
No, that's just one of them.
Okay.
That's adorable.
Very cute.
It's just one? a massive one.
She's a runt.
Anyways, I forgot what I was saying. That was such a cute cat. But yeah, that's the whole thing I wanted. Anybody else want to throw anything out there that has to do in particular, not so much with little balls of fur?
I don't know what. Yeah, that's a cat. But it's like the Jin Yang of the Chinese
Oh
thing.
God.
Nice.
Is
Why
that how
can't
your
you
cat
look at
sleeps?
All right, one more
Hmm?
cat.
That's how my dog
audio.
sleeps.
Hey, oh my gosh.
I'm about to put my dog to sleep if anybody wants it.
Does anyone else have any final thoughts? I mean, I thought that was a great end off. Does anyone else have anything to say, or does anyone have an idea for next week's topic or conversation?
We
Marcus,
do have.
We already came to a decision though for next week's topic.
All
Yeah.
joking aside, Marcus, I really did appreciate where you were going with that. I know that it was a big thing about tying it back to porn, but I was really enjoying what you were going for that, and I appreciate the way you were presenting that. I mean, you know me, I'm always going to give you shit, but it was good
Thank
stuff.
you. No, I love it. I love it when you give me shit. You know, it doesn't. You know, don't let me
Oh,
think I'm not wrong. Always
love
make
it
me
when
think
you
I'm
give
wrong.
me
And I like
Wow.
different metaphors. Are
What's that?
I don't know.
My
don't know.
ears are hurting.
Oh my God.
I don't know what happened.
Oh, that's okay. I'm fine. It's just it was really loud.
I know. That's why I'm on speaker, son.
Same.
What were you saying, Manzi?
I don't know, just that. Yeah. So we have a topic picked out for next week, right?
Yes, we do.
And that's the trolley problem. We could certainly talk about the trolley problem.
Tell me about the trolley problem. I'm
Oh,
not.
the footbridge or the
I'm not
footbridge.
educated enough.
Well, maybe what we could do is when we send out an email for the next meeting, include like a particular video. There's tons of really excellent videos out there that kind of sum up the trolley problem, and they use visual elements, obviously, in a way that's easily digestible. And then that might be a good kind of jumping off point for the next meeting.
Jumping off footbridge. There you go. See, I like that one finally.
In my nature. All right. Any other final thoughts?
Oh, yeah, like greater good. The trolley problem. I get it. Like if you were forced to
Greater good.
to save one person, but it goes off and kills others. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm down for that.
Yeah, the idea is that utilitarianism is grounded by what's called the GHP, which is the greatest happiness principle, which is, again, this is how you calculate an ethical decision, because the utilitarians believed you could literally mathematically calculate the value of your decisions. Again, John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham before him, primarily. But again, the idea is, every decision you make should be based upon what you perceive to be the greatest amount of what will result in the greatest amount of happiness for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time. And so the trolley problem tries to reduce that down into like it's least common denominators, something like that, lowest common denominators. And I like that because, again, it's more complicated than it might sound. And when you kind of get into the intricacies of how you can calculate an experience's value, it really kind of brings back up some points that we talked about today, which is, again, what is objective value? Is there a right or a wrong answer when it comes to making moral decisions? Utilitarians believe that there is. And of course, Kantians, deontologists, certainly believe that there is. I mean, for Kant, everything comes down to the action itself. I mean, if you want to be moral, it's a matter of doing the right thing, as opposed to maybe having a certain kind of character, or the results don't even matter. It's about the intention. The intention
Please
behind.
just don't send out one of the Harris-Craig debates to explain the trolley problem.
You're not into that? I mean, there's so many we could choose from.
Craig's an idiot and Harris is a blowhole. No.
That was good. All right, well, I'm down for the trolley problem. Sounds like yeah, I'm down.
All right, trolley it is. If you choose it.
Manzi. All right, cool. Does anyone else have anything to say, or can we send this bitch off? Or this was a great meeting. I love this.
So are we all gonna play rock, paper, scissors or not?
Oh
I
man,
mean, it's your
TV.
funeral. Whatever you want.
No, but